Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers. We're glad you're with us. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and I think it's going to be a show people are going to find very interesting.
Yeah, we're really pleased to welcome back to the set of The Verdict Ryan Kiesel, who's the Executive Director for the Oklahoma ACLU. Ryan has been involved in that work for a long time, has a lot of interesting things to talk about, and I think our viewers are going to enjoy this.
And we'll get to it right after this break. You're watching The Verdict.
During my time as Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior, I witnessed a fundamental transformation in the government-to-government relationship between tribes and the United States. It has really been a special time when a lot of past disputes have been addressed. What I hope is that history has turned a corner with Indian tribes. My name's Kevin Washburn, and I'm a professor of law at the University of New Mexico School of Law, and I'm a Chickasaw. I always joke that I don't know why anybody's a tax lawyer, but I know why I'm an Indian law lawyer. The joy of my life is teaching students. It really is a lot of fun teaching young people, sending them out in the world to help take care of their communities. And that's what we try to do. And federal Indian law is a powerful force for that because the law often is on the tribe's side. My Chickasaw lineage comes from my mother's side of the family. She was a very strong, powerful woman. I know she had some rough times, but there's such a tremendous sense of pride now because we have really come a long way since those times. The Chickasaw Nation has always been about helping people to help themselves and help ensure that the community remains strong. And today, it's Chickasaws taking care of Chickasaws. I don't look like a Native American necessarily, but I am a full citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and I'm very proud of that. The unconquered and unconquerable Chickasaw Nation is part of my bloodstream.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
The Vet Hero office at the University of Central Oklahoma, it is a one-stop shop for veterans when they're trying to get their education.
I call it my encore job. I get to take care of veterans. We help them transition. I was that guy that transitioned after 24 years, and in the end, GI Bill is a benefit that those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine earned. It was the thing that made us the greatest country in the world coming out of World War II, and it will continue to do the same thing for this future generation of service members.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
This is a genuine pleasure for me to be able to introduce a friend of mine. We have a lot of good guests and we love them all, but this is a particularly distinct pleasure for me to be able to bring to you a friend. Ryan Kiesel is the Executive Director of the ACLU of Oklahoma. He did his undergraduate work at the University of Oklahoma, did his law work also at the University of Oklahoma, taught at OU as an adjunct professor, has been engaged in the private practice of law. He had 3 terms in the House of Representatives in the state of Oklahoma, which ended in 2010. And then in 2011, he joined the ACLU. He's now going to talk to us about what's going on out there. Ryan,
Yeah.
glad to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you. Kent, thanks so much for having me. Mick, thanks for having me on the show. It's good to be back. I've been here before, but as we were talking in the break, it's been so long we can't really remember when it was. So, yeah.
Well, Ryan, what issues are keeping you busy these days?
Well, you know, the ACLU, you know, we are fortunate, and we it's a benefit and a burden that we have such a huge catalog of issues that we work on. Anything that touches on the United States Constitution, the Oklahoma Constitution, our civil rights laws, civil liberties laws at the federal and the state level are really under our umbrella. I mean, so everything from religious freedom to speech, are topics that we're generally going to be interested in, either through litigation or advocacy at a capital or even in a city government, municipal government. But the thing that has really kept the ACLU the busiest over the last many years has been criminal justice reform. And I think that I know that the reason that that's the case is because so many of the other things that we care about, whether that's improving the lot of women in our country, in our state, trying to repair damage that's done to impacted communities, in particular communities of color. So race, gender, economic opportunity, all of these things really coalesce around the criminal justice system. So in the event that we're able to improve the criminal justice system, we're improving a whole range of issues that the ACLU of Oklahoma cares about.
Well, give us a scorecard. How's Oklahoma doing? How's Oklahoma City doing? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think on one hand, we have done so much. I mean, we have become a national leader. When we passed State Question 780, the ACLU was a leader in that campaign. I got to partner with my very good friend, former Speaker of the House, Chris Steele, and we got to be this unlikely dynamic duo traveling around the state campaigning for State Question 780. And for the viewers that may not remember, State Question 780 was one of the most bold, and still remains one of the most bold criminal justice reform measures in our nation, not just in Oklahoma, but in our nation. Because what it did was it said simple possession of all drugs, not just marijuana, but simple possession of all drugs would be treated as a misdemeanor, not a felony. Frankly, I think that even a misdemeanor is too far, but it takes it out of that felony range. And we all know that a misdemeanor is not great. It's still a huge hardship to anybody that's charged and convicted with a misdemeanor. But if you have a felony conviction on your record, you're dealing with everything from loss of student loans, your inability to get housing, inability to get employment, a whole range of things that don't just follow you from the time you're charged and convicted, but follow you often for the rest of your life and impact not just you, but your family and your whole community. So State Question 780, 2016, on the ballot, same night that Donald Trump carries 77 counties in the state of Oklahoma, nearly 60% of Oklahoma voters approve one of the most progressive, aggressive criminal justice reform measures in the country. And then following that, we saw out of that campaign, so what happens in Oklahoma oftentimes is we take a step forward, then we take a step back. And my goal at the ACLU is to, one, make sure that the steps that we're taking forward are as big as they can be, and that the steps that we take back aren't as far as the steps that we take forward. So in 2017, the legislature, largely at the behest of the District Attorneys Association, began an effort to immediately roll back large provisions of State Question 780 through the legislature. So remember, 60% of Oklahoma voters said, we want this. I think that the district attorneys recognized that they weren't going to be able to beat us at the ballot box. They didn't have the resources, and frankly, the argument just wasn't on their side. The people weren't on their side there. But they have an outsized voice at the legislature. A district attorney showing up and talking to a legislator carries a ton of weight. I don't think that it should, but it does. And they went to the legislature, they got very close. They passed a measure in the House that would have repealed most of the significant portions of State Question 780. Fortunately, in 2017, the Senate said no, and that bill died over in the Senate. So we ended up protecting State Question 780, but we lost a lot of ground in 2017. So 2018 began to reboot, and then we began in 2019 to see what I saw were some really big steps forward. One was bail reform, cash bail reform. That's something that Republicans, Democrats across the country are getting behind, because when you think about the criminal justice system, one of the bedrock principles in the United States is that we're innocent until proven guilty. Well, bail is applied to people before they've been convicted of anything. They're presumed innocent. And bail should serve two purposes. Protect public safety. So if you know that somebody's a threat, you make sure that they're not released back into the public so that they can, bring that threat to fruition, and to make people reappear for their court hearings. We know that there are better ways to do that than imposing huge amounts of bail. Bail reform in Oklahoma got within a few votes of passing last year, and it's still alive out at the Capitol this session. But perhaps the bill that got the most attention was a bill, House Bill 1269 from the last legislative session, 2019. It was the last bill passed in the Senate for the entire year. And what that bill did is it made key provisions of State Question 780 retroactive, or created a retroactivity process through the Pardon and Parole Board. It didn't apply to as many people as it should have. It wasn't automatic the way that I felt that it should have been, but it did create a process. And then following that, following the passage of 1269, just a few months later, I got to sit in a room at the Pardon and Parole Board and watch as that board voted on commutations of nearly 500 people in a single day. It was the largest single commutation in a single day in our nation's history. And that was pretty remarkable to be able to watch. I mean, just in an instant, people's lives transformed. They still have a lot to rebuild. I mean, you've been incarcerated for a day or a weekend. You're already at a disadvantage. You've been incarcerated for 3 or 4, 5, 6 months.
We're falling behind on the rehabilitation aspect.
Falling behind on the rehabilitation aspect. We're seeing this year at the legislative session, I really believe, some steps back. So there hasn't really been a clear vision this year, the way that there was last year from the governor and legislative leaders around what criminal justice reform means for the 2020 legislative session. We've seen a number of bills moving through committee very quickly that would undermine key provisions of State Question 780. And we're seeing some increased felonization of activity in the state of Oklahoma, even when we know that incarceration doesn't fix these problems. And I mean, we think that they do. We think that it does, and sometimes it feels good to go out there and vote for these things, or maybe you're afraid of being hit with it in an election year. But we know this stuff doesn't work, and we're just doing it over and over and over again. So I think that we also have State Question 805 on the ballot this year that would eliminate the usage of sentence enhancements for individuals that had prior nonviolent
Is that on
felonies.
the November ballot?
They're out collecting signatures on that right now. ACLU is joined with our good friends Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, Chris Steele again, they're getting the band back together, and a whole range of other folks. The George Kaiser Family Foundation and others have contributed to this campaign to make sure that we get to a point where people are judged on the crime that they're currently charged with, and they don't have the baggage of old crimes that they'd been convicted of carried with them for the rest of their life.
We're going to need to get us to a break. Thanks very much. Ryan Kiesel talking about criminal justice reform. More from Ryan and the ACLU when we get back on The Verdict.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank #2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Ryan Kiesel is here discussing his work with the ACLU.
Ryan, we were talking about State Question 780 and the fact that it passed. There was a companion measure, 781 that had a little unique aspect to it about what to do with savings that are realized when fewer people go to prison, fewer dollars are spent incarcerating them. How do we measure that, and what do we do with them? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that 781 and 781 funding is still. I think there are a couple of things to it. One, it's still up in the air as to what constitutes 781 savings, and then after that, I think is a recognition, and we knew this all along. I think that it was part of the campaign that perhaps we should have talked about more, but we knew all along with 781 that we weren't going to see savings materialize in year 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 or 5. And the significant savings were going to be savings that we would see maybe even a decade from now. The real economic benefit, and I would stress that for the ACLU's involvement, that economic benefits are secondary at best to why we're engaged in this work. But the real economic benefit is getting folks back into their families and their communities and back in their jobs.
All of the social issues that fall apart when a person is in.
Yeah, you take a mom or a dad out of a house, and you put them, and it's really, when we think about just incarceration in general, the more that we are learning about just the psychology of what happens whenever we incarcerate someone, even in the best of prisons, we're still isolating people. We're still taking away their ability to meet their basic needs and their dignity. And in Oklahoma prisons, oftentimes we're exposing them to even more violence and criminal activity. And we know that all of those things, isolation, exposure to more violence, and then when you get out, your inability to meet your basic needs because of your prior incarceration, those are the things that make it much more likely that somebody engages in crime in the future, and probably more serious crime. But I think that it's a good. When we released, when the state released nearly 500 people in a single day, the then interim and now director of the Department of Corrections estimated that it was going to save the state around $10 million. Now, there was an immediate question of, well, is that $10 million in savings? Is that 781 savings that needs to go into the 781 fund? My position on that has been yes. Those savings are a direct result of State Question 780. The retroactive application of State Question 780, and it needs to go into that fund. But that just hasn't been the case so far.
Let's talk about the initiative petition process. It's been communicated to me that Teddy Roosevelt was the president when Oklahoma's Constitution was written, so it's a very populist Constitution, and one of the aspects of that is the initiative petition process, and it's very easy to get something on the ballot compared to other states.
Well, I don't know about very easy. I wouldn't
compared
say,
to other states.
But I will say, our Constitution, and a lot of people will throw stones at our Constitution, especially at its length. But it really is the product of a progressive era. And when we say progressive in 2020, oftentimes we think of Democrats or liberals. But progressive in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, what that meant was that the founders of our state wanted very clear limits on what government could and could not do. And even in that place, they provided for one of the most fundamental and precious rights reserved to Oklahomans, and that's the right to initiative. The right to create a ballot question and go around your legislators if you need to.
As a matter of fact, that's the first right reserved to the people.
That's right. And the Supreme Court in Oklahoma has continually recognized and protected that right. And I think that it's important because if we look at our legislators, take criminal justice reform, for example. State Question 780, if we would have wanted to pass State Question 780 through the legislature, I don't know that we could have passed State Question 780 through the legislature even today. And the criminal justice reform measures that we passed since then, I think, have been because we demonstrated that there was a political appetite among the electorate for that. Oftentimes, legislators are not. They're maybe 2, 4, 3 election cycles behind where their actual voters are at. Legislators presume a certain amount of caution and conservatism and I don't mean conservative in a political sense, more as just in a way that you approach governance. That they presume that on the part of the voters when it just doesn't exist. And so there's this disconnect. Think medical marijuana, State Question 788. The legislature would have never passed State Question 788, especially in the form that it is, but it went to the vote of the people, and the people said, yes, we want this. And so the ability to act as a catalyst, incredibly important. Even in 2020, Medicaid expansion. For years, people have been trying to push Medicaid expansion through the legislative process to no end. It hasn't happened, and we finally get a record number of signatures turned in for Medicaid expansion, and now the governor has walked through 3 or 4 iterations of Medicaid expansion on his own, including one that contemplates, at least temporarily, full Medicaid expansion in the way that State Question 802 would have. Now, 802 would be in the Constitution. It would be permanent. There wouldn't be the ability to put restrictions on it in the future, and that's why I think it's a better avenue than what the governor's proposing. But what it's done is it's created a conversation at the Capitol around that policy where for years there'd just been logjam on it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. One of the more troubling things about direct democracy right now that's happening is just this week in a House Rules Committee, they passed a resolution that if it passes through the full House and the Senate, would go to a vote of the people, possibly as early as this summer, maybe this November, that would make it virtually impossible for Oklahomans on the right or the left or somewhere in the middle to be able to move initiative petitions in the future. When I say virtually impossible, it would create signature thresholds somewhere north of 300,000. I mean, Medicaid expansion broke records, and they barely got, what was it, Kent, close to 200,000 after the signatures were finally tallied up. That broke a record. And those things, when you say it's easy, the time limit, and Kent and I have talked about this, and he's written about it, the time limit of 90 days, that restriction makes it really difficult. And so you oftentimes have to, have, in addition to volunteer signature gatherers, you have to have a paid signature collecting effort. And those, right now, the price tag on something like that's $1.8 to $2.2 million. If you increase that to $300,000, you're going to make that so much more expensive that this fundamental right, the very first right reserved to Oklahomans in our state constitution, would be out of reach for all but the wealthiest of Oklahomans and all but those that had access to raise significant amounts of money to be able to put these things on the ballot. As it stands right now, it's still too expensive and too prohibitive, but it is accessible. This resolution would make it inaccessible. I'm hoping that groups like the ACLU, we can join with, I've been a lawyer. I've litigated against folks trying to put, abortion restrictions on the ballot, and there have been a lot of ballot questions that I, just firmly disagree with. But I show up at the ballot box and I cast my vote yes, or I cast it no. And what this would do is it would just take that away from all Oklahomans of all political stripes. And I know that some lawmakers and some really big moneyed interest, they would rather confine the legislative process to the state capitol building.
Yeah, it's easier to control the legislature than it is every person in Oklahoma.
It is. And I just don't think we should be controlled. I think that the way it should be is if we've got these questions and it serves an important role, whether the question fails or passes, I think it sparks a conversation among Oklahomans. And we've got to
just about 45 seconds
left.
Yeah,
we've got to a point where people are so disengaged from the partisan political process that oftentimes some of the greatest amount of excitement on the ground in Oklahoma are around these ballot measures. And to take that away, I think, would be to take a lot of oxygen out of the political dynamics in Oklahoma.
It's an exciting time in your line
Very
of work.
exciting.
All right. Ryan Kiesel's been our guest. He is the executive director of the ACLU here in Oklahoma. We'll be back with a final word, and we wish you back on another show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
See you in a minute.
Ken.
It used to be okay in teachers' lounges. It used to be okay in maternity wards. It was okay in sporting arenas, college campuses, and office spaces. But now that we understand the deadly dangers of secondhand smoke, that's not okay anymore. So why is it okay that thousands of employees are exposed to it every day at work? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's protect hardworking Oklahomans. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I really think people are so unaware of the number of kids waiting just in Oklahoma. And I think if more people knew that those children were out there waiting, you know, I think that just by the way we live our lives and the people we talk to, that maybe we can help encourage adoption from Oklahoma.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We're wrapping up a show with Ryan Kiesel, the Executive Director of the ACLU.
Yeah, he's always busy, got a lot on his plate. Really does a nice job in Oklahoma. He's a native Oklahoman and has grown up here and done his education and work in the legislature as well. He is really a stalwart leader of the ACLU.
In criminal justice reform, it shows you, how well we can work together when the right and the left agree. They may not agree on all the particulars, but I think there was wide consent that we need to do something. It isn't working. Yeah. I think some positive steps have taken forward, and I think Ryan was good to kind of spell out the problem. It was kind of good to hear, step by step of how far we've come in just a few years.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a couple of websites to let you know about. If you'd like to get more information from Ryan and his organization, you can go to ACLUOK.org. That's ACLUOK.org. And we have a website. It's theverdict.tv, and you can log on there and tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a subject you'd like to see us discuss. And Kent, we're coming up on our 1,000th show this summer. Can you believe that?
We are creeping up. Actually going to be early fall, I think.
This is number 984, so it'll be here before you know it.
Indeed.
We'll see you next week on another edition of The Verdict.